After 30 years of marriage, Tim decided to bring his young assistant Rosaline to our anniversary dinner at Le Jardin, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. I watched them walk in together, laughing intimately, his hand resting on the eye. Small of her back in a gesture that spoke volumes. Without a word of complaint, I smiled warmly as they approached our table, ordered an expensive bottle of champagne, and when the waiter brought it over, I handed Tim a manila envelope containing divorce papers and evidence of their 2-year affair. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The reservation at Le Jardin had been made months in advance. Our 30th anniversary was meant to be special, a celebration of 3 decades building a life together, raising 2 children, and supporting each other through life's inevitable ups and downs. At least, that's what I had thought we were doing. I'm Alice Henderson, 53 years old, the Chief Financial Officer at Meridian Healthcare, a position I worked tirelessly to achieve while simultaneously managing our household and raising our children. For years, I believed Tim and I had built something meaningful together, a partnership of equals, a modern marriage based on mutual respect and shared goals. That illusion shattered 6 months ago when I discovered the first text message. It was innocent enough on the surface. "Can't wait for our meeting tomorrow. I have some exciting ideas to discuss." But something about the wording, the time it was sent, 11:42 p.m., and the fact that Tim quickly deleted it when he saw me glance at his phone triggered my suspicions. I'm not normally the type to snoop. I've always believed that trust is fundamental to a healthy relationship. But something shifted in me that night, an inexplicable certainty that what I had seen was merely the tip of an iceberg. For the first time in our marriage, I found myself looking through Tim's phone while he showered, checking his email while he slept, and eventually hiring a private investigator to follow him. The evidence accumulated quickly. Lunch dates that extended into the afternoon, mysterious business trips that didn't appear on his company's calendar, hotel receipts for rooms in our own city. Rosaline Bennett, his 31-year-old assistant, had been hired 2 years ago. Their affair had begun almost immediately. What surprised me most wasn't the affair itself. In 30 years of marriage, we had weathered our share of challenges, miscarriages, in our early years, financial setbacks during the recession, his mother's lengthy illness, and my father's sudden death. None of these had broken us. But watching the evidence of Tim's deception mount day after day, I realized that what hurt most wasn't the betrayal of our physical relationship, but the elaborate web of lies he had constructed. Lies about working late. Lies about business trips. Lies about why he couldn't attend our daughter Isabel's graduation ceremony. Lies about the sudden appearance of new cologne in his bathroom cabinet. Small lies, big lies. Lies that formed a parallel narrative to our shared life. The most painful discovery came when I learned they had been planning a future together. Emails between them discussed which city they might move to once everything was settled. They had researched properties in San Diego, a place Tim knew I had no interest in relocating to despite his occasional suggestions over the years. They had even discussed how to minimize the financial impact of the divorce, his divorce from me, with Tim assuring her that his lawyer had strategies to protect most of the assets. I spent weeks in a fog of disbelief and anguish. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, found myself crying in bathroom stalls at work. My assistant Renee noticed, of course, and covered for me during meetings when my focus slipped. My children, Isabel, now 28 and working as an architect in Chicago, and Aaron, 25 and finishing medical school in Boston, called regularly, concerned about the strain they heard in my voice during our weekly calls. I told no one what I had discovered. Not my closest friends, not my sister, not my children. I needed time to process, to decide what to do with this knowledge. 3 weeks ago, Tim mentioned our upcoming anniversary dinner. "I've made reservations at Le Jardin," he said casually over breakfast. "The 14th at 7:30. I know how much you love their duck confit." I nodded, sipping my coffee, watching him over the rim of my cup. In that moment, as he smiled at me with practiced affection before returning to his newspaper, something crystallized within me. A strange calm descended, replacing the turmoil that had been my constant companion for months. "That sounds lovely," I replied. "It's a milestone worth celebrating properly." He glanced up, perhaps surprised by my enthusiastic response, then smiled again. 30 years, he said, reaching across to squeeze my hand briefly. Who would have thought? Who indeed? That evening, I called my lawyer, Clay Donovan, who had been advising me discreetly since the evidence of the affair became undeniable. "I'm ready," I told him. "Prepare everything for the 14th. Over the next 3 weeks, I methodically put my plan into action. I secured copies of all our financial records. I documented every asset we shared. I opened a separate bank account and transferred a fair portion of our savings into it. Nothing excessive, nothing that could be construed as financial misconduct, just enough to ensure I wouldn't be vulnerable in the immediate aftermath. I reached out to a realtor about listing our house, researched apartments in the downtown area I had always loved, but Tim had deemed impractical, and began quietly sorting through 3 decades of accumulated possessions, deciding what was truly important to me. And now here we were, at Le Jardin, the evening of our 30th anniversary. I had arrived early, chosen a table with a clear view of the entrance, and waited. When Tim walked in with Rosaline on his arm, not even attempting to maintain the fiction that she was meeting us coincidentally or that her presence was professional, something inside me that had been tightly wound for months finally relaxed. The truth, at last, was in the open. No more pretense. No more lies. Before discovering Tim's affair, my life had followed a predictable rhythm for 3 decades. I had met Tim Henderson during my final year of business school. He was ambitious, charming, and quick-witted, a rising star at an investment, firm with plans to make partner before he turned 35. I was equally driven, determined to prove myself in corporate finance at a time when women in leadership positions were still something of a novelty. Our courtship was a whirlwind of intellectual connection and shared ambition. We married within a year of meeting, both certain we had found our perfect match. Power couple wasn't a term widely used back then, but that's how we saw ourselves, partners in every sense, building our careers and our life together with equal commitment. The early years unfolded much as we'd planned. Tim made partner on schedule. I climbed the corporate ladder at Meridian Healthcare, starting in accounting and advancing steadily. We bought our first house in the suburbs, a colonial with good schools nearby and space for the family we planned. To have Isabel arrived 3 years into our marriage, Aaron 2 years after that. Parenthood required adjustments, of course. I took maternity leave both times, but returned to work after 3 months, determined not to lose momentum in my career. Tim and I adapted, hiring a nanny, coordinating our schedules, making it work. We were proud of maintaining the delicate balance between professional success and family life. There were challenges, certainly. 2 miscarriages between Isabel and Aaron left me emotionally raw. The recession of 2008 hit Tim's firm hard, leading to stress and uncertainty. When Tim's mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, the burden of managing her care fell largely to me since Tim was too busy at work. When my father died suddenly of a heart attack, Tim attended the funeral but was back at the office the next day, leaving me to handle the estate matters alone. Through it all, I believed we were a team. If the distribution of family responsibilities wasn't quite equal, I rationalized it as temporary. Just a phase, just this project, just until the next promotion. I took pride in being the kind of woman who could handle it all. Executive career, active children, aging parents, community commitments, and a well-run household. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Our social circle consisted mostly of other professional couples, Tim's colleagues, and their spouses, my fellow executives, parents from the children's private school. We hosted dinner parties in our spacious dining room, attended charity galas where Tim charmed everyone with his witty anecdotes, and took carefully planned vacations to places that looked impressive on our Christmas cards. To the outside world, we epitomized success, financial security, attractive and accomplished children, a beautiful home in an exclusive neighborhood, and a marriage that had stood the test of time. "How do you make it work?" friends would ask, marveling at our apparent harmony after so many years. "Communication?" I would answer with a smile. "And mutual respect." Tim would nod in agreement, his arm around my shoulders, the perfect picture of a devoted husband. "Alice is my rock," he would say. "I couldn't have built any of this without her." As the children grew older and more independent, Tim and I settled into a comfortable routine. We had our separate interests, my book club and yoga classes, his golf games and poker nights, but still made time for each other. Date nights every Friday, coffee together in the morning before work, annual anniversary dinners at progressively more exclusive restaurants. When the children left for college, there was a period of adjustment. The empty nest syndrome I had read about but hadn't fully anticipated. Without the daily demands of active parenting, the quiet moments at home sometimes felt awkward, as if we were relearning how to be just the two of us again. "We should travel more," Tim suggested. "See all those places we put off visiting while the kids were at home." We did travel. London, Paris, a Mediterranean cruise. But somehow these trips felt more like items to check off a list than genuine adventures shared. Looking back now, I can see the subtle signs of disconnection that I ignored or explained away. Tim's increasing absorption with his phone, the decreased frequency of our physical intimacy, the way we could sit through entire restaurant meals with little substantive conversation. "It's just a busy season at work," I told myself when Tim began staying late at the office more frequently. "It's natural for passion to evolve into something more comfortable after 30 years, I reasoned, when our once vibrant physical relationship dwindled to occasional, perfunctory encounters. When Rosaline Bennett was hired as Tim's new assistant 2 years ago, he mentioned her only in passing. "The new girl seems sharp," he said. "MBA from Stanford. Speaks 3 languages. She's helping me with the Singapore client." I met her at the firm's holiday party that December. She was striking, tall and graceful with a cascade of auburn hair and an engaging laugh. I noticed how animated Tim became in her presence, how he seemed to stand straighter, laugh more readily. But I dismissed the small twinge of unease I felt. Tim had always been charming with everyone, especially in professional settings. It meant nothing. Even when Tim began mentioning Rosaline more frequently in conversation, her insights on a difficult client, her innovative approach to a marketing challenge, I saw it only as professional admiration. When he started attending more evening business functions and weekend conferences, I accepted his explanations without question. After all, what reason did I have to doubt him after 30 years of marriage? That was the status quo of my life. 6 months ago, comfortable, predictable, built on what I believed was a foundation of trust and mutual respect. A life I had invested 3 decades in creating, nurturing, and protecting. A life I was proud of. A life built on an illusion. The text message that triggered my suspicions arrived on a Tuesday evening in January. Tim and I had just finished dinner, takeout, from our favorite Thai restaurant, eaten in the kitchen while discussing mundane matters, a leak in the guest bathroom that needed fixing, whether to replace the aging refrigerator, plans for an upcoming visit from Aaron. Tim's phone chimed with the distinctive tone he used for work messages. He glanced at it, his expression shifting subtly before he quickly turned the phone face down on the table. When I asked if everything was all right, he nodded dismissively. "Just Rosaline with a question about tomorrow's presentation. Nothing urgent." But something in his manner, A fleeting tension around his eyes, perhaps, or the way his fingers lingered protectively on the phone, triggered an unfamiliar feeling of unease. Later, when he went upstairs to shower, I did something I had never done in 30 years of marriage. I picked up his phone. The message was still on the screen. "Can't wait for our meeting tomorrow. I have some exciting ideas to discuss. Miss, you already are." Those last two words, "miss you," seemed incongruously intimate for a professional relationship. More troubling was Tim's response, partially typed but unsent. "Missing you more. These evenings at home are—" He hadn't finished the message, perhaps interrupted when I asked about the notification. But those few words opened a door I couldn't close again. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. As soon as Tim left for the office, I began a systematic search of our home. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, some tangible evidence to either confirm my suspicions or put them to rest. In Tim's home office, I found nothing unusual at first. His desk was organized as always, containing work documents, our household bills, and investment statements. But when I checked the back of his desk drawer, a hiding place he had used since our early marriage for surprise gifts, I found a small velvet jewelry box. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Perhaps this was an anniversary gift purchased early, an explanation for his secretive behavior. I opened the box to find a delicate gold bracelet with a small diamond pendant. Expensive but tasteful. Not at all my style. I preferred silver to gold and had told Tim many times that I found diamonds overrated. But perhaps he had finally paid attention to the jewelry I wore every day and chosen accordingly. Then I saw the gift receipt, dated 3 weeks earlier. At the bottom was a handwritten note in Tim's familiar scrawl. "For Rosaline, happy birthday. Until I can give you everything, please accept this small token of my affection." My hands trembled as I replaced the box exactly as I had found it. A birthday gift for his assistant. An expensive, intimate gift, hidden in our home, accompanied by a note that implied a future together. Still, I told myself there could be an explanation. Perhaps an inappropriate crush on his part, a momentary midlife indiscretion. Not necessarily an affair. Not necessarily the end of 30 years together. That afternoon, I did something I never imagined I would do. I contacted a private investigator. Miguel Vega came highly recommended by Clay Donovan, a lawyer friend who had represented Meridian Healthcare in several cases. I met Miguel at a coffee shop 20 miles from our home, feeling like a character in a spy novel as I slipped him an envelope containing Tim's photo, his work schedule, and a retainer check drawn from my personal account. "I need to know if my husband is having an affair with his assistant," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I need proof, one way or the other." Miguel's expression remained professionally neutral. "We'll begin surveillance immediately. Mrs. Henderson, I'll report back within a week with preliminary findings." The next 7 days were among the most difficult of my life. I went through the motions at work and at home, maintaining a facade of normalcy while my internal world crumbled. I analyzed every conversation with Tim, searching for clues I might have missed. I scrutinized credit card statements going back months, noting business dinners charged on weekends, hotel charges in our own city, gifts purchased from boutiques I had never heard Tim mention. Miguel's first report arrived via encrypted email, containing surveillance photos and a detailed timeline. Tim and Rosaline, entering a boutique hotel downtown at 1:45 p.m. on a Wednesday. Tim and Rosaline, having dinner at an intimate restaurant across town, his hand covering hers on the table. Tim and Rosaline, kissing in the parking garage beneath his office building. Surveillance confirms regular meetings between subjects, typically 2 to 3 times weekly, Miguel wrote in his clinical assessment. Behavior consistent with romantic relationship. Recommend continued monitoring for duration and additional parties if relevant to client's needs. Additional parties. The suggestion that Tim might be involved with multiple women hadn't even occurred to me. But the evidence before me was devastating enough. My husband of 30 years was conducting an ongoing affair with his young assistant. With Miguel's continued assistance over the following weeks, I uncovered the full extent of Tim's deception. The affair had begun approximately 2 years ago, shortly after Rosaline was hired. What had initially been hotel encounters and dinner dates had evolved into something more serious. They took weekend trips together, carefully disguised as business travel. They had discussed a future together in emails Miguel recovered through legal but ethically questionable means. Most painful were the intimate details, how Tim described me to her as increasingly distant and career-focused, how he portrayed our marriage as essentially over in all but name, how he promised her, once the children are settled in their own lives, we can be together openly. The final piece of evidence came from Tim's secondary email account, which Miguel discovered during his investigation. In a message to Rosaline dated just 2 weeks earlier, Tim wrote, "I've made reservations for our anniversary dinner. Alice. Suspects nothing. After 30 years, she's simply grateful for any attention. Once we get through this obligatory celebration, we can move forward with our plans. I've already spoken with Clyde about drawing up the necessary papers." Clyde Wilkins, Tim's friend and personal attorney for over 20 years, the man who had handled our wills, our children's trust funds, our real estate transactions. Now, apparently advising Tim on how to divorce me with minimum financial damage to himself. The betrayal was complete. Not just the affair itself, but the lies, the manipulation, the calculating plan to play me for a fool while securing his future with Rosaline. 30 years of partnership, reduced to an obligatory celebration to be endured before discarding me. That night, I sat alone in our bedroom with the evidence spread around me. Photographs, email printouts, credit card statements, hotel receipts. The narrative they created was unambiguous. My marriage was a fiction. My husband was a stranger. I gathered everything into a folder, and then, for the first time since discovering Tim's message 6 weeks earlier, I allowed myself to cry. Not delicate tears of sadness, but gut-wrenching sobs of grief and rage. I cried for the years invested, for the partnership I thought we had built, for the future I had planned. I cried until no more tears would come. When dawn broke, I made my decision. I would not confront Tim immediately. I would not give him the opportunity to manage the situation, on his terms, to implement whatever exit strategy he and Clyde had devised. No, I would wait. I would prepare. And I would choose the moment of revelation myself. Our 30th anniversary seemed perfectly appropriate. The morning after my night of grief, I woke with swollen eyes and a strange sense of clarity. I studied my reflection in the bathroom mirror, the lines at the corners of my eyes, the silver threading through my dark hair, the slight softening beneath my jaw. At 53, I was no longer the young woman Tim had married, but I recognized in my own gaze a strength I had forgotten was there. I called in sick to work again, something I had rarely done in my career. My assistant Renee was concerned. 2 days, in 1 week? Are you sure you're okay, Alice? But I assured her I just needed rest. The truth was, I needed time alone in the empty house to think. I moved through the rooms slowly, seeing our shared space with new eyes. The formal living room we never used except to entertain Tim's colleagues. The kitchen I had remodeled to Tim's specifications, though I was the one who cooked. The master bedroom with its king-sized bed where intimacy had become increasingly rare. Every space held memories, layers of our shared history, some genuine, some now revealed as performance. In Tim's home office, I sat in his leather chair and ran my hands along the smooth desktop. This was where he had composed emails to Rosaline, perhaps late at night while I slept upstairs. This was where he had planned their rendezvous, researched their weekend getaways, plotted the gradual extraction of himself from our marriage. A framed photo on his desk showed our family at Isabel's college graduation, Tim with his arm around me, both of us beaming with pride. Had he been seeing Rosaline even then? Had he stood there smiling for the camera while mentally composing his escape plan? I picked up the frame and stared at my own image. I looked happy, confident, completely unaware that the foundation of my life was already cracking beneath me. The woman in that photo believed in her marriage, trusted her husband, thought she knew the shape of her future. That woman was gone. In her place was someone new, someone forged in the crucible of betrayal, someone whose eyes now saw clearly. This new Alice understood something fundamental that had eluded her for decades. She had been living in an unequal partnership, giving far more than she received. How many times had I rearranged my schedule to accommodate Tim's work events? How often had I taken on additional household responsibilities when he claimed to be too busy? How many of his messes, literal and figurative, had I quietly cleaned up over the years? I thought back to significant moments in our marriage. When Isabel was born with complications and spent 2 weeks in the NICU, Tim had visited daily but returned to work immediately, leaving me to navigate the medical decisions and emotional trauma largely alone. When Aaron struggled with anxiety in middle school, I was the one who found therapists, attended appointments, and adjusted my work schedule to be more present. When Tim's mother's Alzheimer's worsened, I was the one who researched care facilities, handled the financial arrangements, and visited weekly. Tim claimed his work schedule was too demanding to manage these details. Yet he had apparently found plenty of time for Rosaline. The more I reflected, the more I recognized a pattern that had been present from the beginning. Tim's career had always taken precedence. His needs had always come first. He made the major decisions: where we lived, how we invested, where we vacationed. With my input considered but rarely prioritized, I had been complicit in this imbalance, telling myself that compromise was part of marriage, that supporting Tim's ambitions was my role as his wife. I had measured my worth by how well I managed it all: career, children, home, social obligations, without complaint. The painful truth crystallized. I had been living someone else's life, a life designed around Tim's preferences, Tim's goals, Tim's image of success. I had sublimated my own desires so completely that I hardly recognized them anymore. What did I want? The question felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. What would my life look like if it were truly mine to shape? I moved to the kitchen and made myself tea, sitting at the breakfast nook where sunlight streamed through windows that faced east. My one insistence when we bought this house, that the morning light come into the kitchen. A small victory in a war I hadn't known I was fighting. With a notepad before me, I began to write, letting thoughts flow without censorship. I want to live downtown, walking distance to theaters and restaurants. I want to travel, not to check destinations off a guy list, but to immerse myself in new places. I want weekends without social obligations to Tim's colleagues. Want to reconnect with old friends I've neglected. I want quiet evenings reading without the television blaring sports in the background. I want to sleep in the center of the bed. I want to make decisions without calculating their impact on someone else's ego. Want to rediscover who Alice Henderson is when she isn't defined as Tim's wife. The list continued, desires large and small pouring out after decades of suppression. When I finally put down my pen, I felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. The woman emerging on the page was someone I barely knew, but desperately wanted to become. That afternoon, I drove downtown and walked the streets of the arts district where I had always imagined living. I passed boutiques, cafes, and galleries, picturing myself as a regular patron rather than an occasional visitor. I stopped at a real estate office on impulse and picked up listings for downtown condominiums. As I studied the glossy photos of modern spaces with city views, I felt something stir inside me. Not just anger at Tim's betrayal, but excitement at the possibilities now opening before me. For the first time, I allowed myself to envision a future entirely of my own making. Driving home, I passed Meridian Healthcare's headquarters, where I had worked for over 25 years. My career had been one area where I had maintained some autonomy, where my achievements were my own. I had risen to CFO through ability and determination, earning respect in a male-dominated field. That accomplishment belonged to me alone. By the time I arrived home, Tim had texted that he would be working late, another lie, another rendezvous with Rosaline, no doubt. I didn't bother to respond. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and continued my inventory of our marriage. Our finances were substantially commingled, but I had maintained separate retirement accounts and investments from before our marriage. As CFO, my compensation package included significant stock options that had appreciated considerably over the years. A divorce would certainly impact our financial position, but I would not be left destitute. The house held little emotional attachment. For me now, it had been chosen primarily for its address and appearance, a status symbol more than a home. I was ready to leave it behind. Our children were adults with lives of their own. They would be hurt and disappointed by the dissolution of their parents' marriage, but they were mature enough to eventually understand. What about me? The question echoed as I moved through the evening routine. Dinner, dishes, laundry, all the small tasks that maintained our household. Could I rebuild my life at 53? Could I find happiness alone after spending my entire adult life as part of a couple? As I climbed into bed that night, I realized the question had already been answered. I had been emotionally alone for longer than I cared to admit. Tim's physical presence in the house had masked an absence of true partnership. I didn't need to find happiness alone. I needed to reclaim it from the compromise and self-denial that had gradually eroded it. The path forward was becoming clear. The next morning, I woke before dawn with absolute clarity about what needed to be done. I showered, dressed in one of my most confidence-inspiring outfits, a tailored navy suit I wore for board meetings, and prepared for the day ahead. Tim had already left for an early meeting, another convenience that served my purposes. My first call was to Clay Donovan. Though he had referred me to Miguel Vega for the investigation, I had not yet discussed my findings with him. His secretary initially told me he was booked solid, but when I mentioned it was regarding a potential high-asset divorce, she found an opening at 930. Clay's office was on the 32nd floor of a downtown high-rise, with views of the river and the financial district beyond. He greeted me warmly. We had worked together on several Meridian Healthcare legal matters over the years, but his expression sobered as I laid out the evidence of Tim's affair. "I'm sorry, Alice," he said, reviewing the photographs and email. Transcripts. "Truly, this is a difficult situation." "I'm past the difficulty," I replied. "I'm interested in solutions. Specifically, I want to know my options for ending this marriage on my terms." Clay set down the documents and studied me, perhaps assessing whether my calm demeanor masked emotional fragility. "You're certain divorce is what you want? Sometimes couples can work through infidelity with counseling." "This isn't just infidelity," I said, my voice steady. "This is systematic deception. Tim and Rosaline have been planning their future together for months, possibly longer. And he's been consulting with Clyde Wilkins about divorce strategy, presumably looking for ways to minimize what I receive." At the mention of Clyde's name, Clay's expression hardened slightly. They were colleagues but competitors, with a history of facing off in high-profile cases. "I see," he said. "In that case, the fact that you've come to me first gives us a significant advantage. Clyde wouldn't be able to represent Tim now due to conflict of interest, since you've consulted with me first." "Good," I said. "What's our next step?" Over the next 2 hours, Clay outlined a strategy that was both methodical and aggressive. Since Georgia was an equitable distribution state, all marital assets would be subject to division, regardless of whose name they were in. Tim's affair could potentially influence the court's determination of what was equitable in our case. You've been married 30 years, supported his career, raised your children, and maintained your own successful career, Clay noted. You're entitled to a substantial settlement. The evidence of his affair with a subordinate at his firm could also impact his professional standing. That gives us leverage. I'm not interested in destroying Tim's career, I clarified. I just want what's fair. Fair often requires leverage, Clay replied pragmatically. Now, regarding timing, you mentioned your anniversary is coming up? 2 weeks from now, I confirmed. Tim has made reservations at Le Jardin. A slight smile touched Clay's lips. And you want to use that occasion to serve him the papers? Yes, I said, surprising myself with my certainty. It seems appropriate. Dramatic, Clay commented. But I understand the impulse. Here's what we need to do before then. He outlined a detailed action plan, documenting all assets, securing copies of tax returns and investment statements, monitoring joint accounts, establishing separate credit, and preparing the divorce petition itself. He recommended I transfer a reasonable amount of money to an individual account to ensure immediate financial security. Not so much that it could be construed as hiding assets, he cautioned, but enough to cover your needs during the initial separation period. I left Clay's office with a comprehensive to-do list and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the following week. My next stop was the bank, where I opened a new individual account and transferred funds from our joint savings. The amount was substantial but fair, approximately 1/4 of our liquid assets, leaving the majority still available to both of us. From there, I went to my office at Meridian Healthcare. Renee looked surprised to see me after my sick day, but seemed relieved that I appeared composed and professional. I thought you were ill, she said as I settled at my desk. I'm better now, I replied, which was true in ways she couldn't possibly understand. I need to make some adjustments to my schedule for the next few weeks. I'll be delegating several projects to the team leads and clearing my calendar of non-essential meetings. Renee looked concerned. Is everything all right? I considered how to respond. Renee had been my assistant for 8 years, and we had developed a relationship that went beyond the professional. She knew my family, had attended Aaron's graduation dinner, had helped organize Isabel's engagement party. She would learn the truth eventually. I'm preparing for some significant personal changes, I said carefully. I may need flexibility in my schedule. I'd appreciate your discretion until I'm ready to discuss it further. Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. Of course, whatever you need. Over the next week, I executed Clay's action plan with the same efficiency I brought to my corporate responsibilities. I gathered financial documents, photographed valuable items in our home, made copies of tax returns, and compiled a comprehensive inventory of assets. I researched apartments in the downtown arts district and scheduled viewings for several promising options. I also consulted with Dr. Larissa Singh, a therapist Clay had recommended, who specialized in helping women navigate midlife transitions. Our first session was revelatory, not because she offered profound insights, but because speaking my situation aloud to a neutral party helped crystallize my own thoughts. You seem very composed for someone in your position, Dr. Singh observed, after I recounted my discoveries and plans. I've moved past the initial shock, I explained. Now I'm focused on action. That's a common response, she said. The activity provides a sense of control in a situation where you've experienced a profound loss of control. But at some point, you'll need to process the emotional impact. I've cried, I said defensively. I've acknowledged the pain. Dr. Singh smiled gently. Grief isn't a one-time event, Alice. It's a process. Your marriage is ending after 30 years. That's a significant loss, regardless of the circumstances. Be prepared for emotions to surface. Unexpectedly, even as you move forward with your plans. I nodded, intellectually accepting her point while feeling emotionally armored against further pain. The betrayal had calcified something inside me, creating a protective shell around my vulnerable core. Throughout this period, I maintained a facade of normalcy with Tim. We shared meals when his work schedule allowed, discussed mundane household matters, and slept in the same bed, though with the careful distance that had become our norm. If he noticed any change in my demeanor, he attributed it to work stress, or perhaps the approaching milestone of our anniversary. A week before our anniversary dinner, Tim mentioned the reservation at Le Jardin again. "I've requested our usual table by the window," he said over breakfast, "and I've ordered flowers to be delivered that morning." I smiled and thanked him, marveling at his ability to perform the role of thoughtful husband while actively planning to leave me. The performance seemed almost cruel now that I understood its hollowness. That afternoon, I met with Clay to review the final divorce papers. The petition was comprehensive, detailing our assets and requesting equitable distribution with consideration. Given to the length of our marriage and Tim's infidelity, Clay had prepared additional documents outlining temporary support arrangements and suggested division of property. "Once these are served, things will move quickly," Clay advised. "Are you prepared for that? For Tim to move out? For people to know?" "Yes," I said, feeling the truth of it in my bones. "I'm ready for this charade to end." The night before our anniversary, I packed a small overnight bag and reserved a room at the Grand Hyatt downtown. I wasn't certain how events would unfold at Le Jardin, but I knew I wouldn't be returning to our house that night. I placed the bag in my car trunk alongside a banker's box containing essential documents and irreplaceable personal items. As I completed these final preparations, I felt not sadness, but a growing sense of liberation. For 30 years, I had compromised, accommodated, and adjusted to maintain our marriage. Tomorrow, I would reclaim my autonomy. Tomorrow, I would begin writing a new story, one with Alice Henderson as the central character, not merely a supporting role in Tim Henderson's life. The morning of our anniversary dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day that seemed incongruous with the emotional hurricane I was about to unleash. True to his word, Tim had arranged for flowers to be delivered, an elaborate arrangement of red roses that the florist presented with congratulations on 30 years of marriage. I thanked her and placed the arrangement on the dining room table, reading the card that accompanied it. "To my wife on our 30th, looking forward to celebrating with you tonight. Love, Tim." The calculated performance of it all strengthened my resolve. Tim had spent the night at home, unusual for a Thursday, when he typically claimed late meetings, and made a show of kissing me goodbye before leaving for work. "See you tonight," he said with practiced affection. 7 o'clock. Don't be late." I spent the morning finalizing details with Clay, confirming that the envelope containing divorce papers would be delivered to Le Jardin and held by the Mistress until my signal. I arranged for a car service to pick me up afterward, regardless of how the evening unfolded. Then I turned my attention to preparing for the evening. I had purchased a new dress for the occasion, not the conservative style Tim preferred, but a sleek burgundy sheath that accentuated my figure and made me feel confident. I had my hair styled, not in my usual practical bob, but in loose waves that softened my features. My makeup was more dramatic than my typical office look, with smoky eyes and deep red lips. As I dressed, I studied my reflection, seeing not just the external changes but the fundamental shift in my bearing. The woman in the mirror stood straighter, chin lifted, eyes direct and unflinching. She looked ready for whatever came next. I arrived at Le Jardin at 6:45, 15 minutes before our reservation. The maître d' Marcel greeted me with the deference reserved for valued patrons. "Mrs. Henderson, welcome. We have your table ready, and the special item you arranged to have delivered is here." He patted the manila envelope discreetly tucked beside his reservation book. "Thank you, Marcel." I'd like to be seated now, and please bring that to me once my husband arrives. He led me to our usual table by the window, with its view of the city skyline now illuminated against the darkening evening sky. I ordered a glass of champagne, Dom Perignon, Tim's favorite, and waited. At 7:10, I received a text from Tim. Running a few minutes late. Start without me if you want. I sipped my champagne and maintained my composure, aware of curious glances from nearby diners. A woman alone on what was clearly an important occasion, given the premium table and champagne. At 7:25, I spotted them through the restaurant's glass doors, Tim and Rosaline, arriving together. They paused in the entryway, her hand on his arm, laughing intimately about something. Tim glanced around the restaurant, still unaware I could see them. He leaned down and whispered something in Rosaline's ear, then straightened his tie in a gesture of preparation. They approached the maitre d' stand, and I saw Marcel's professional mask slip momentarily as Tim requested the table reserved under Henderson. Marcel's eyes flicked toward me, then back to Tim, clearly evaluating the situation. Yes, Mr. Henderson, your wife is already seated. If you and your guest will follow me. Tim's steps faltered almost imperceptibly as he processed Marcel's words. He hadn't expected me to arrive early. Perhaps he had planned to explain Rosaline's presence as a coincidence, a colleague he had bumped into outside. Now that narrative was compromised, I watched their approach with a strange detachment, as if observing a scene in a film rather than experiencing it directly. Tim's expression cycled rapidly through surprise, discomfort, and finally, a forced smile. Rosaline, by contrast, looked genuinely shocked to see me, her perfect features arranging themselves into an uncomfortable grimace. Alice, Tim said as they reached the table. You're early. No, I corrected calmly. I'm precisely on time. You're late. And you've brought company to our anniversary dinner. Tim cleared his throat. Yes, well, Rosaline and I were finishing up some work on the Singapore account, and since she was heading this way— Please, I interrupted, gesturing to the empty chairs. Both of you, sit down. They exchanged a quick glance before complying, Tim pulling out Rosaline's chair in a gesture of ingrained chivalry that struck me as absurd under the circumstances. This is a surprise, Tim said, attempting to regain control of the situation. I didn't realize you'd mind if Rosaline joined us briefly. She has her own plans later. I studied his face, the face I had woken up beside for 30 years, and felt a curious emptiness where pain should have been. Do I seem like I mind? My calm response clearly unsettled him. He had anticipated either an embarrassed acceptance of his explanation or perhaps an angry scene. My measured reaction left him without a script. Marcel approached the table bearing the envelope. Mrs. Henderson, the item you requested. Thank you, Marcel, I said, taking it from him. And would you please bring another bottle of the Dawn? Perignon? We're celebrating 30 years of marriage tonight. Of course, madame. Right away. Tim's expression flickered between confusion and wariness. Rosaline sat rigidly in her chair, her discomfort palpable. Tim, I said conversationally, you remember when we came here for our 25th anniversary? You gave me those sapphire earrings I never wear because they're not my style at all. He blinked, thrown by the non sequitur. Yes, of course. Did you know that sapphires symbolize loyalty and faithfulness? I continued. Ironic choice in retrospect. Comprehension began to dawn in his eyes. The realization that I knew more than he had assumed, that this evening was not proceeding according to anyone's plan but mine. The champagne arrived, and Marcel made a show of opening it and filling 3 glasses. To celebrate your 30 years, he said with perfect professionalism, though his eyes conveyed something closer to solidarity with me. I raised my glass. To 30 years of marriage, and to truth. Tim hesitantly raised his glass, while Rosaline, left hers untouched, her eyes darting between us with growing alarm. "Alice," Tim began, his voice lowered. "Perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue for whatever you're thinking of saying." "On the contrary," I replied. "I think it's perfect. The scene of so many of our milestone celebrations. The place where you intended to endure one last, obligatory celebration before proceeding with your plans." His face paled, recognition of his own words striking home. "You've been reading my emails." "Not personally," I clarified. "I employed a professional for that. Just as you've been consulting with Clyde about how to divorce me with minimal financial impact." Rosaline made a small sound and began gathering her purse. "I should go." "Please don't," I said with artificial pleasantness. "You're an essential part of this conversation, Rosaline. After all, you and Tim have been planning your future together for some time now. San Diego, wasn't it? A fresh start once the inconvenient wife was out of the picture?" Tim's expression hardened. "That's enough, Alice. You've made your point." "Oh, I haven't even started," I replied, sliding the envelope across the table. "I believe this is what you've been working toward. I'm just accelerating the timeline." Tim stared at the envelope without touching it. "What is this?" "Divorce papers," I said simply. "Already prepared, just waiting for your signature. I've saved you and Clyde the trouble of drafting them yourselves." The blood drained from Tim's face as he finally grasped the full extent of what was happening. "You've been planning this." "Yes," I acknowledged, "just as you've been planning. To leave me. The difference is, I'm doing it openly, while you've been lying to my face every day for years." A tense silence enveloped our table. Tim stared at the envelope as if it might bite him, while Rosaline seemed frozen in place, her earlier attempt to leave abandoned. "This is ridiculous," Tim finally said, pushing the envelope away. "I'm not signing anything. We need to go home and discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," I replied evenly. "The marriage is over. It has been for some time. You just hadn't informed me yet." Tim leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You're making a scene, Alice. People are starting to notice. I'm simply having dinner with my husband and his mistress on our anniversary," I said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "If that constitutes a scene, it's one of your making, not mine." Several heads turned in our direction. Tim's jaw tightened as he realized his preferred approach, quiet control, was rapidly becoming impossible. "Fine," he hissed. "Let's go somewhere private and talk about this like rational adults." "I am being perfectly rational," I countered. "I've discovered my husband's infidelity, consulted an attorney, and initiated divorce proceedings. What could be more rational than that?" Rosaline, who had remained silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke. "Tim, maybe I should leave you two alone to—" "No," Tim interrupted sharply. "Stay where you are. This won't take long." He turned back to me, his expression hardening. "Alice, you're upset and you're not thinking clearly. Let's go home. Get some rest, and we can discuss this tomorrow when you're calmer." His condescension ignited a flash of anger that I quickly suppressed. "I'm neither upset nor unclear in my thinking. I've had 6 months to process this situation, ever since I found Rosaline's text message on your phone." "6 months?" Tim repeated, genuine shock crossing his features. "You've known for 6 months and said nothing?" "I needed evidence," I explained calmly, "and time to make arrangements. Unlike you, I didn't want to enter this process unprepared." Tim's face flushed with anger. "So you've been investigating me? Hiring some sleazy private detective to follow me around? Reading my private communications? That's an invasion of privacy." The irony of his outrage was almost comical. "Privacy? You lost any right to privacy when you betrayed our marriage vows. But please, tell me more about the moral high ground you think you occupy while sleeping with your assistant." Rosaline flinched visibly at my words. Tim switched tactics, his voice softening to the persuasive tone he used in business negotiations. Alice, I know this is painful, and yes, I've made mistakes. But 30 years of marriage deserves more than this ambush. We built a life together. We raised children together. Doesn't that count for anything? It counted for everything, I replied. That's why your betrayal is unforgivable. People make mistakes, he persisted. Marriages hit rough patches. We could try counseling. I studied him, recognizing the calculated nature of his apparent contrition. Counseling? While you're actively planning to leave me for Rosaline? While you're consulting attorneys about how to minimize my settlement? Your mistake wasn't having an affair, Tim. It was thinking I wouldn't find out, or that I'd be too afraid of change to do anything about it. Our conversation was interrupted by the ringing of Tim's phone. He glanced at it, then quickly silenced it. But not before I glimpsed the caller ID. Isabel. Were you planning to tell the children tonight? I asked, the realization striking me suddenly. After our obligatory celebration, were you going to call them with the news that we're separating? On our anniversary? Tim's expression confirmed my suspicion. I thought it would be best to tell them together, he said defensively. A united front, for their sake. A united front, I repeated incredulously. While you've been planning your exit for months without my knowledge, how considerate of you. Tim's phone rang again. Aaron this time. He silenced it again, looking increasingly uncomfortable. You should answer, I suggested. They're probably wondering why you're not picking up on such an important night. Tim hesitated, then grabbed his phone and stood. I need to take this. Don't do anything until I get back. As he walked toward the restaurant entrance for privacy, Rosaline and I were left alone at the table. The young woman who had been sleeping with my husband for 2 years could barely meet my eyes. I'm sorry, she finally said, her voice barely audible. I never meant for any of this to happen. I regarded her coolly. And yet it did happen. For 2 years, with a married man 30 years your senior, who also happens to be your direct supervisor. Not exactly a series of accidents, is it? She flushed. Tim said your marriage was essentially over, that you were together in name only. He said you wouldn't care. How convenient for both of you to believe that, I observed. It certainly simplifies the narrative, the loveless marriage, the passionate affair, the inevitable transition to a new, better relationship. All without having to acknowledge the deception involved. Rosaline looked genuinely distressed. It wasn't like that. Tim and we connected on a deeper level. It wasn't just physical. I'm sure you believe that, I said, not unkindly. Just, as I'm sure Tim has told you everything you wanted to hear. That's what he does. He constructs narratives that serve his purposes. I believed them for 30 years. Before Rosaline could respond, Tim returned to the table, his expression thunderous. You called them already? You told Isabel and Aaron about the divorce before I could explain my side? I haven't spoken to our children in 2 days, I said, confused by his accusation. Then why are they both calling to ask if the rumors are true? Isabel says her colleague's husband is at Le Jardin right now and texted her that we're having some kind of public confrontation about divorce. I glanced around and noticed several diners discreetly using their phones, some pointed in our direction. In the age of social media, our private drama was becoming public knowledge in real time. The modern world moves quickly, I commented. But this is hardly my fault. You're the one who brought your mistress to our anniversary dinner. Tim sank back into his chair, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. This is a disaster, he muttered. My firm has a morality clause. If this gets out, an affair with my assistant, it could affect my partnership. Perhaps you should have considered that before embarking on a 2-year relationship with an employee 20 years your junior, I suggested. Tim's expression shifted from anger to calculation. Alice, be reasonable. A public scandal doesn't benefit either of us. Our reputation in the community, the children's embarrassment, there's no need for this to become ugly. I agree, I said, surprising him. Which is why the divorce papers before you are completely fair. Equitable distribution of assets, no alimony given my own income, and no mention of infidelity in the public record if you sign amicably. He eyed the envelope with new interest. And if I don't sign? Then we proceed to litigation, where your emails, hotel receipts, and photographs of your encounters with Rosaline become part of the court record. Public record. Rosaline paled visibly. Photographs? There are photographs? Miguel was very thorough, I confirmed. The Four Seasons last month was particularly well documented. Tim's expression darkened with anger. This is blackmail. This is consequence, I corrected. You chose deception over honesty, betrayal over loyalty. I'm simply ensuring that the outcome reflects that choice, either with discretion or with transparency. It's up to you. As Tim processed this ultimatum, my phone chimed with an incoming call. Isabel. Unlike Tim, I answered immediately. Hello, sweetheart, I said calmly. Mom, what's going on? Her voice was tense with worry. Andrea's husband just texted her a photo of you, Dad, and some woman at Jardin, saying something about divorce papers. Is this some kind of joke? I'm afraid not, I replied, maintaining my composure. I've discovered your father has been having an affair with his assistant for the past 2 years. I've initiated divorce proceedings. I'm sorry you're finding out this way. Tim lunged for the phone. Give me that. Isabel, honey, don't listen to your mother. She's upset and not thinking clearly. I moved the phone away from his reach. Isabel, I'll call you back in an hour when I'm alone and can explain everything. Properly. I love you. I ended the call before Tim could intervene further. The evening had spiraled beyond any of our control. What I had intended as a private confrontation, albeit in a public setting, was rapidly expanding to include our children, social circles, and potentially Tim's professional world. Part of me regretted the escalation, particularly involving Isabel and Aaron this way. But another part recognized that the truth would have emerged eventually, likely in a narrative crafted by Tim to minimize his culpability. The drive to the Grand Hyatt passed in a blur of city lights and silence. After the confrontation at Jardin reached its inevitable conclusion, Tim storming out with Rosaline following uncertainly behind him, the divorce papers still unsigned on the table, I had signaled for the check, left a generous tip for Marcel's discretion, and exited to my waiting car service. In the quiet of the hotel room, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of the evening. I kicked off my heels, poured a glass of water from the minibar, and sat on the edge of the king-sized bed. My phone had been buzzing consistently since I left the restaurant. Calls from Tim, from Isabel, from Aaron, even from my sister Renee, who had somehow already heard whispers of what had happened. I silenced the device and set it aside. Tomorrow would be time enough for explanations and damage control. Tonight, I needed to process. The confrontation had not gone entirely as planned. I had expected anger from Tim, perhaps some attempt at justification, but I had not anticipated how quickly the situation would spiral beyond the three of us at that table. In this age of instant communication, privacy was an illusion, especially when scenes unfolded in upscale restaurants where diners were inevitably connected to the same social circles. Now the narrative was out of my control. By morning, versions of the evening would have spread through text messages, phone calls, and social media. Tim would undoubtedly be crafting his own account, positioning himself as the victim of an unreasonable, vindictive wife. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had I made a tactical error in choosing such a public venue? Should I have confronted Tim privately, maintaining at least the appearance of dignity? I dismissed the thought almost immediately. A private confrontation would have allowed Tim to minimize, to manipulate, to maintain the advantage of secrecy he had exploited for 2 years. My approach had been dramatic, perhaps even theatrical, but it had accomplished something essential. It had shifted the power dynamic between us. My phone buzzed again, Isabel's third call in the past 20 minutes. This time I answered. "Mom?" Her voice was tight with emotion. "What the hell is going on? Dad's not making any sense, and there are already people texting me about you two getting divorced. On your anniversary? Seriously?" I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry you're finding out this way, sweetheart. It wasn't my intention for things to become so public so quickly." "But it's true? You're divorcing Dad?" She sounded incredulous. "After 30 years? Just like that?" "Not just like that," I corrected gently. "Your father has been having an affair with his assistant Rosaline for the past 2 years. He's been planning to leave me once you and Aaron were settled in your lives. I discovered evidence of the affair 6 months ago and have been preparing for this moment ever since." Silence stretched between us, broken only by Isabel's shaky breathing. "I can't believe Dad would do that," she finally said. "He always seemed so, I don't know, devoted to you." "I thought so too," I acknowledged. "We were all deceived, not just me." "And tonight? At your anniversary dinner? People are saying you served him divorce papers in public, that it was this whole dramatic scene." I winced slightly, hearing how it sounded from her perspective. "Your father brought Rosaline to our anniversary dinner, Isabel. He didn't expect me to be there early or to recognize what was happening. Yes, I had divorce papers prepared, and yes, I presented them to him. The public nature of it wasn't entirely intentional, at least not to the extent it's apparently become. Dad says you hired someone to spy on him, that you've been keeping this secret for months while plotting some kind of revenge." Of course, Tim would frame it that way. "I hired a private investigator to gather evidence after I found suspicious messages on your father's phone. And yes, I kept what I discovered to myself while I consulted an attorney and made financial arrangements. That's not revenge, Isabel. That's self-protection." Another lengthy silence. "Aaron's freaking out," she finally said. "He tried calling, both of you. But Dad just kept saying he'd explain later, and you weren't picking up." "I needed some time to collect myself," I explained. "This hasn't been easy, regardless of how it might appear from the outside." "Where are you now? Are you at home?" "No, I'm at a hotel downtown. I won't be returning to the house tonight." Isabel's voice sharpened with concern. "A hotel? Alone? Mom, you shouldn't be alone right now. Aaron and I could—" "I'm fine," I interrupted gently. "Actually, being alone is exactly what I need tonight. I've had very little privacy these past months, carrying this knowledge while maintaining appearances. It's liberating in a way to finally have everything in the open." "Are you sure? Because I could drive down from Chicago tomorrow. It's only a few hours." Her concern touched me deeply. "That's not necessary, sweetheart. But thank you for offering. I promise I'm all right." After reassuring Isabel once more and promising to call both her and Aaron the following day, I ended the call. I had barely set the phone down when it buzzed with another incoming call. Tim. I let it go to voicemail. Within seconds, a text message appeared. "Answer your damn phone, Alice. We need to talk about how to handle this mess you've created." The capitalized "you've" sparked a flare of indignation. Typical of Tim to blame me for the public exposure of his affair, as if my reaction was the true transgression rather than his betrayal. I typed a brief response. "There's nothing to discuss tonight. I'll have Clay contact Clyde tomorrow regarding next steps." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again as Tim composed and reconsidered his reply. Finally, "The children are upset. You should have waited until we could tell them together." I didn't respond. Tim had planned to inform Isabel and Aaron about our separation tonight anyway, according to his own schedule. That they learned of it amid public drama rather than through his carefully crafted narrative was unfortunate, but hardly my primary concern. Another text appeared from Tim. "I'm coming to the house. We need to talk, face to face." I smiled grimly. "I'm not at the house, and I won't be coming back tonight, or possibly ever." A lengthy pause then. "Where are you?" "Safe," I replied simply. "Good night, Tim." I silenced the phone again and moved to the bathroom, where I removed my makeup and changed into the comfortable clothes I had packed in my overnight bag. Standing before the mirror in hotel-provided slippers and my own soft loungewear, I hardly resembled the polished, confrontational woman who had faced down her husband and his mistress hours earlier. This quieter, more reflective version of myself seemed closer to the truth of who I was, or perhaps who I was becoming now that the performance of my marriage had concluded. I ordered room service, a simple meal I would never have chosen at home where Tim's preferences always prevailed, and ate while gazing out at the city lights. From this high floor, the downtown district sparkled with possibility. Somewhere among those lights were the art galleries, theaters, and cafes I had always longed to be closer to. Somewhere among those buildings were apartments where I might soon live, spaces that would reflect my tastes alone. As midnight approached, marking the official end of my 30th wedding anniversary, I felt a curious mixture of grief and relief. The life I had built with Tim was over, a loss that would require mourning despite the circumstances of its ending. But the path forward, though uncertain, beckoned with promise. My phone buzzed once more, a text from an unexpected source. "Rosaline, I'm sorry for my role in causing you pain. Tim never told me the truth about your marriage. I should have asked more questions, should have been more skeptical. I'm ending things with him tonight. This isn't an excuse, just an apology you deserve to hear." I read the message twice, surprised by its apparent sincerity. I considered not responding, but something compelled me to acknowledge her words. "Thank you for the apology," I wrote back. For what it's worth, I believe Tim probably convinced himself of the narrative he presented to you. He's always been skilled at constructing realities that justify his choices. Rosaline replied almost immediately, "I'm beginning to understand that." Morning light streamed through the hotel windows, waking me from a surprisingly deep sleep. For a moment, disorientation clouded my mind. The unfamiliar room, the absence of Tim's soft snoring, the strange silence unmarked by the usual morning routines of our household. Then memory returned, bringing with it the full reality of the previous night and the irrevocable changes now set in motion. I checked my phone to find 17 missed calls, 29 text messages, and numerous email notifications. Tim had continued texting well past midnight, his messages evolving from angry demands to wounded appeals, and finally to grudging capitulation. The most recent, sent at 5:43 a.m., simply read, "Have Clay contact Clyde. Let's keep this civilized." Messages from Isabel and Aaron reflected their confusion and concern. My sister Renee had called twice, undoubtedly having heard fragments of the story through mutual acquaintances. There were even texts from several friends, their careful wording suggesting they had heard something was amiss but were uncertain of the details. Most surprisingly, there was an email from Walter Pierce, Tim's longtime personal attorney. The subject line read, "Recusal and professional courtesy," and the brief message informed me that he was withdrawing from any involvement in our divorce proceedings due to conflict of interest, having previously represented both Tim and me in family matters. He wished me well and expressed hope that the process could remain amicable. I forwarded Walter's email to Clay, then showered and dressed for the day ahead. I ordered room service breakfast and was halfway through my coffee when Clay called. "Good morning, Alice. I trust you've recovered from last night's events?" "As much as can be expected," I replied, appreciating his neutral phrasing. I've received 3 calls from Clyde Wilkins this morning, Clay continued. Apparently, he's now representing Tim officially, and he's eager to discuss settlement terms. I get the impression Tim is quite motivated to resolve this quickly and quietly. I'm sure he is, I said, recalling Tim's concern about his firm's morality clause. Has he agreed to the terms outlined in our proposal? Not entirely, Clay admitted. He's pushing back on the division of retirement accounts and wants to keep the house, but his overall posture is surprisingly conciliatory. I think the public nature of last night's confrontation has him worried about further exposure. Good, I said firmly. That was rather the point. After discussing strategy with Clay for nearly an hour, I outlined my plans for the day. A meeting with a real estate agent to view downtown apartments, an appointment with my financial advisor to restructure investments, and a visit to the office to brief my team on my temporary delegation of certain responsibilities. Are you sure you're ready to jump back into regular activities so quickly? Clay asked with concern. Most clients take at least a few days to process before making major decisions. I've had 6 months to process, I reminded him, and I function better with clear goals and actions than sitting around reflecting on what's happened. My first stop after checking out of the hotel was Meridian Healthcare. I had texted Renee earlier to expect me, but as I entered the executive floor, I was unprepared for the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly at my approach, the quick glances and forced smiles from colleagues. News traveled fast in our professional circles, and Tim's position at one of the city's premier investment firms ensured our private drama had become common knowledge among the business elite. I kept my head high, my expression composed as I made my way to my office. Renee met me at the door, her eyes wide with concern. Alice, I've been so worried about you. Are you all right? Do you need anything? I've cleared your calendar for the next 3 days, and I've told everyone you're dealing with a family emergency. I smiled at her efficiency and genuine care. Thank you, Renee. I appreciate your discretion. But I'm not hiding away. I have several meetings scheduled today, and I plan to maintain my normal work routine as much as possible. Her eyebrows rose, in surprise. But surely you need some time to… after what happened last night, no one would expect you to just carry on business as usual. What exactly have you heard about last night? I asked, curious about how the story was being framed. Renee hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Just that you and Tim had some kind of public confrontation at Le Jardin, that there was a scene involving someone else, and divorce was mentioned. I didn't know what to believe, honestly. I gestured for her to close my office door, then gave her a concise but honest summary of the situation, Tim's affair, my discovery of it months ago, my careful preparations, and yes, the confrontation at our anniversary dinner. My God, Alice, she breathed when I finished. I had no idea. You've been carrying this knowledge for months and never showed a sign of it. How did you manage to function? By compartmentalizing, I explained. By focusing on what I could control, and by planning for a future beyond this crisis. That future was taking shape more rapidly than I had anticipated. By midday, I had viewed 3 downtown apartments, one of which, a corner unit with floor-to-ceiling. Windows overlooking the arts district, felt immediately right. The real estate agent, noting my obvious interest, mentioned that another offer was likely coming in that afternoon. I'll take it, I decided on the spot. Full asking price, cash, offer 30-day closing. The agent blinked in surprise. Don't you want to think it over? Perhaps discuss it with your husband? I'm in the process of divorce, I said calmly, and I don't need to think it over. This is exactly what I've been looking for. By 2 p.m., I had signed the purchase agreement and wired the earnest money deposit. By 3:30, I had met with my financial advisor to restructure my investment portfolio, shifting assets that had been held jointly with Tim into my name alone, where legally permissible. By 5, I had briefed my executive team at Meridian on the temporary redistribution of some of my responsibilities to allow flexibility in my schedule during the divorce proceedings. Throughout the day, I received updates from Clay, negotiations with Clyde progressing, preliminary agreements on certain aspects of asset division, continued disagreement on others. Tim, it seemed, was vacillating between wanting a quick, quiet settlement and fighting for what he perceived as his rightful share of our accumulated wealth. "He's in a difficult position," Clay observed during our late afternoon call. "He wants to avoid publicity, but he also doesn't want to feel he's being taken advantage of financially. His attorney is deliberately dragging things out on certain points while conceding others quickly. A negotiating tactic," I surmised. "Make us work for the important concessions." "Exactly. But overall, we're making progress. I think we can avoid a protracted court battle if that remains your preference." It did. Despite the dramatic nature of our public confrontation, I had no desire to extend the process of separating my life from Tim's. The sooner our divorce was finalized, the sooner I could fully begin my new chapter. As evening approached, I faced a decision I had been avoiding all day: where to spend the night. The hotel was comfortable but impersonal. Our house, still filled with Tim's presence and our shared history, held little appeal. But the downtown apartment wouldn't be mine for at least 30 days. My sister Renee called as I was contemplating this dilemma. "Alice, I know you're handling all this with your usual competence and composure, but you shouldn't be alone tonight. Come stay with me. I've got a guest room ready and I'm making that pasta you like." The invitation was tempting. Renee's comfortable condo, her non-judgmental company, the simple comfort of family. But something held me back. "Thanks, Renee, but I think I need one more night to myself, to process everything that's happened and plan my next steps." "You and your planning," she said with affectionate exasperation. "Always 3 moves ahead. But sometimes it's okay to just feel what you're feeling, Alice. To be sad or angry or even relieved without immediately channeling it into action." Her words echoed Dr. Singh's caution about my tendency to focus on activity rather than emotion. Perhaps they were both right. Perhaps there was value in sitting with the complex feelings this transition evoked rather than constantly moving forward. "I'll think about it," I promised Renee, and I meant it. "But tonight, I need space to breathe." I booked another night at the Grand Hyatt, ordered dinner from a restaurant I had always wanted to try, but Tim had dismissed as too experimental, and sat by the window watching the city transition from workday to evening. Tomorrow, I would drive to our house while Tim was at work, pack more of my personal belongings, perhaps begin the process of sorting through 30 years of accumulated possessions. But tonight was for reflection, for acknowledging not just the strategic aspects of my situation, but its emotional dimensions as well. 30 years of marriage was ending. A life I had helped build was being dismantled. No matter how justified or necessary, such endings carried their own particular grief. I allowed myself to feel it: the sadness, the anger, the disappointment, and yes, beneath it all, a current of liberation. These emotions weren't contradictory, but complementary, each a necessary part of the complex process of disentangling my life from Tim's and creating something new from what remained. The sense of progress and control I had cultivated over the past days evaporated the moment I pulled into the driveway of our home. Tim's car was parked in its usual spot, despite the fact that he should have been at his office for a client meeting scheduled weeks ago. I sat in my car for several minutes, considering my options. I could drive away, return later when I was certain he would be gone. I could call Clay and have him present for whatever confrontation might be brewing. Or I could face Tim directly, maintaining the assertive stance I had established at Le Jardin. I chose the third option. The house was unusually quiet as I entered. No television blaring CNBC in the background, no coffee maker gurgling on the kitchen counter. I found Tim in his home office, surrounded by papers and looking haggard, though confident, polished investment executive had been replaced by a man who appeared not to have slept or changed his clothes since our confrontation 2 nights ago. He looked up as I entered, his expression a complex mixture of resentment and resignation. "Thought you'd come today," he said. "To get your things." "Some of them," I confirmed. "I didn't expect you to be here." Tim gestured vaguely at the papers scattered across his desk. "I've been going through our financial records, trying to make sense of what's happening." I remained, standing in the doorway, maintaining distance between us. "Clay and Clyde are handling the details. There's no need for you to review everything personally." "Isn't there?" Tim's voice hardened. "My wife of 30 years ambushes me with divorce papers after secretly investigating me for months, and I'm supposed to just let the lawyers handle it? Just sign whatever they put in front of me?" "You were planning to divorce me anyway," I reminded him. "I simply accelerated your timeline." Tim ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "It wasn't like that, Alice. Yes, Rosaline and I discussed possibilities, but nothing was decided. Nothing was in motion." The emails I saw indicated otherwise. "You saw fragments, moments of fantasy, perhaps, but not the full picture." He leaned forward, his tone earnest. "I've built my entire adult life with you. 30 years. That's not something I was prepared to walk away from lightly." I felt a flicker of doubt at his apparent sincerity, quickly suppressed by the memory of his calculated deception. "And yet you conducted a 2-year affair while maintaining our marriage as if nothing had changed." "I made mistakes," he acknowledged. "Serious ones. But does that justify what you've done? The public humiliation? Turning our children against me? Threatening my professional standing?" "I haven't turned anyone against you, Tim. Your actions have done that. And any professional consequences stem from your decision to pursue a relationship with your subordinate, not from my response to discovering it." Tim's expression hardened. "You knew exactly what you were doing at Jardin. You could have confronted me privately, served the papers discreetly. Instead, you created a spectacle designed to maximize my embarrassment." There was some truth to his accusation, though I wasn't prepared to admit it. "You brought your mistress to our anniversary dinner," I pointed out. "What exactly did you expect?" "Not that," he said bitterly. "Not the calculated destruction of my reputation." We stared at each other across the room, the familiarity of 30 years overlaid with the strangeness of our new adversarial relationship. "The children are furious with me," Tim continued, his voice softer now. "Aaron won't even take my calls. Isabel listened to my explanation but made it clear she doesn't believe me. My own children? Alice." I felt a pang of sympathy despite myself. I hadn't anticipated the extent to which Isabel and Aaron would side with me, though perhaps I should have. Tim had always been the more distant parent. His connection with them filtered through my more consistent presence in their lives. "They're adults," I said. "They'll form their own judgments about what's happened." Tim shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "Always so rational, so measured. Even now. Do you feel anything, Alice? Anything at all about the end of our marriage?" The question pierced deeper than he knew. "Of course I do," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath. "I feel betrayed. I feel foolish for not seeing the truth sooner. I feel grief for what we've lost. But mostly, I feel determined to move forward." Tim studied me for a long moment, then turned back to the papers on his desk. "Clyde tells me you're being surprisingly reasonable about the settlement terms. No alimony demands, no excessive property claims, just an equitable split." "That's all I've ever wanted," I confirmed. "A fair resolution so we can both move on." "Move on," Tim repeated hollowly. "Just like that. 30 years reduced to assets on a balance sheet to be divided. You reduced our marriage to far less when you began your affair with Rosaline." Tim flinched but didn't argue the point. Instead, he asked. "Where will you go, once everything's settled?" "I've purchased an apartment downtown. I take possession in 30 days. "So fast," he murmured. "You really have been planning this for months." I didn't respond to that. "I've come to pack some more of my personal belongings. I'd prefer to do it without an audience if you don't mind." Tim nodded wearily. "Take what you need. I'll be leaving soon anyway." He started gathering the papers on his desk. "Clyde wants to meet to discuss counter-proposals to some of Clay's terms." "I thought you said I was being reasonable," I noted. Ghost of Tim's familiar calculating smile appeared. "Reasonable doesn't mean I can't negotiate for better terms. That's business, Alice. You of all people should understand that." The weeks following my confrontation with Tim passed in a whirlwind of practical matters and unexpected emotional shifts. Through Clay's skilled negotiation and my own firm stance on key issues, we reached a settlement agreement faster than either of us had anticipated. Tim, despite his initial posturing, ultimately prioritized a quick resolution to minimize ongoing publicity about our split. The division of assets proved less contentious than I had feared. Tim kept the house, which held little emotional attachment for me now. I retained my retirement accounts and a fair portion of our joint investments. We divided the artwork and furnishings with surprising civility, each of us prioritizing pieces that held personal significance rather than financial value. 30 days after our confrontation at Le Jardin, I signed the final divorce papers in Clay's office. The procedure was remarkably anticlimactic. A few signatures, a brief handshake with Clyde Wilkins, and the conclusion of 30 years of marriage was legally formalized. "Congratulations, I suppose," Clay said as he walked me to the elevator. "Though that doesn't seem quite the right sentiment." "Thank you feels more appropriate," I replied. "For your guidance through this process." He studied me with professional concern. "And how are you doing? Really?" I considered the question seriously. "I'm okay. Better than I expected, actually. There's a certain relief in having everything finalized." That same afternoon, I received the keys to my new apartment. The timing seemed symbolically appropriate. One chapter definitively closed, another beginning. I stood in the empty space, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and felt a surge of possibility that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. For the first time in decades, I was creating a space that would reflect only my preferences, my aesthetic, my needs. The openness of the apartment seemed to mirror the expanding sense of freedom in my life. Room to breathe, to stretch, to rediscover myself beyond the confines of marriage. I began furnishing the apartment gradually, selecting each piece with deliberate care. A sleek sofa in a deep teal shade that Tim would have rejected as impractical. Bookshelves for the novels he had always dismissed as trivial. Art from local galleries featuring female artists I had admired but never collected. Each addition to the space represented a small reclamation of my identity. Isabel visited when the apartment was half furnished, bringing houseplants as a warming gift. She walked through the rooms, taking in the dramatic city views and contemporary design. "It's so different from the house," she observed. "So, you?" I smiled at her perception. "That's exactly what I was aiming for." "You seem different too," she said carefully. "Lighter somehow, despite everything." "I feel lighter," I admitted. "There's a freedom in starting over, even when the circumstances that led here were painful." Isabel's expression grew serious. "Dad says you won't even consider reconciliation, that you've shut that door completely." "I have," I confirmed gently. "Some betrayals can't be undone, sweetheart. And honestly, I'm discovering that I don't want to go back to that life. I'm finding too much value in this new one." Aaron proved more reluctant to adjust to the changed family dynamic. His anger at Tim remained intense, his visits to my new apartment infrequent and brief. He was processing the dissolution of his parents' marriage in his own way, and I gave him the space to do so, maintaining connection through regular calls and text messages. Beyond my children, I found my social circles shifting in unexpected ways. Some couples who had been regular fixtures in Tim's and my joint social life quietly disappeared, uncomfortable with the new dynamic, or perhaps privately taking sides. Others, particularly several women I had known for years, stepped forward, with surprising candor about their own marital challenges, as if my divorce had somehow granted permission for more authentic conversations. Most surprising were the new connections that began to form. My downtown location placed me in proximity to the cultural institutions I had always loved but rarely frequented due to distance and Tim's lack of interest. I began attending gallery openings, chamber music performances, literary events, first alone, feeling awkward and conspicuous but gradually with growing confidence. At a book signing for a memoir I had particularly admired, I struck up a conversation with a literature professor from the local university. Margot, in her early 60s with striking silver hair and an infectious laugh, invited me to join her book club, a group of professional women who met monthly to discuss contemporary fiction and, as she put it, solve the world's problems over good wine. The first meeting I attended felt like discovering a room in my house I hadn't known existed. A space where intellectual curiosity was celebrated, where women spoke without self-censorship about ideas, politics, relationships, and ambitions. I left feeling more intellectually stimulated than I had in years. "You should join us for the theater series," Margot suggested, as several of us lingered after the official discussion had ended. "We have season tickets to the repertory company downtown. Nothing too experimental, but consistently thought-provoking." 6. Months earlier, such an invitation would have required negotiation with Tim, consideration of his schedule and preferences, probably eventual decline. Now, I simply checked my calendar and said, "I'd love to." That moment, small yet significant, crystallized the transformation occurring in my life. The logistics of my divorce had been challenging, the emotional aftermath complex. But beneath it all ran a current of expanding possibility. Each decision made solely on my own preferences, each new connection formed, each discovery about my interests and capacities represented a step further into this unfamiliar but exhilarating territory of self-determination. "You're blooming," my sister Renee observed over lunch, 8 weeks after my divorce was finalized. "I haven't seen you this engaged with life since... Well, honestly, I can't remember when." I smiled, recognizing the truth in her words. "I feel like I'm waking up from a long sleep," I admitted, discovering parts of myself that got set aside somewhere along the way. 1 year after that fateful anniversary dinner at Le Jardin, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown apartment, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in hues of gold and crimson. The space around me had evolved from a blank canvas to a true reflection of myself, elegant yet comfortable, filled with books, art, and mementos from recent travels. The past 12 months had brought transformations I could scarcely have imagined when I first discovered Tim's betrayal. What had begun as a painful ending had become the catalyst for remarkable renewal. My professional life at Meridian Healthcare had flourished. Freed from the constant compromises of my marriage, I found new energy for challenging projects and bold initiatives. The board had recently approved my proposal for expanding our community health programs, a passion project I had advocated for years. My relationships with Isabel and Aaron had deepened in unexpected ways. The initial shock and anger over their father's actions and the divorce had gradually given way to a more mature understanding. Our Sunday dinners, now hosted in my apartment with takeout from favorite local restaurants, had become treasured rituals of connection and candid conversation. "You know what's weird?" Isabel had commented recently. "I feel like I know you better now than I ever did when you were with Dad. Like, you were always somewhat muted before." Her perception had struck me as profoundly accurate. I had been Muted, adapting my opinions, tempering my enthusiasms, constraining my choices to maintain the harmony of our marriage. Without those constraints, I had indeed become more fully myself. Tim and I had established a careful civility that allowed us to navigate shared family occasions without tension. He had sold the house 6 months after our divorce, unable to maintain it alone and perhaps uncomfortable with its memories. Rosaline was no longer in his life, their relationship having ended the night of our confrontation, as she had promised in her text. I occasionally heard updates about him through mutual acquaintances. He had taken early retirement from his firm, was traveling extensively, and seemed to be conducting a kind of midlife reassessment. I wished him well in that journey, genuinely and without bitterness. The book club had become a centerpiece of my social life, along with the theater group, a hiking club I had joined on impulse, and volunteer work teaching financial literacy at a women's shelter. These varied connections offered different facets of companionship and purpose, creating a rich tapestry of engagement that I had never experienced when my social circle revolved primarily around Tim's colleagues and their spouses. I had even begun dating again, cautiously, selectively, discovering that romance at 54 held its own particular delights and challenges. Whether these explorations would lead to another significant relationship remained to be seen, but the possibility remained open rather than foreclosed. Looking back at the woman who had sat in her car that January evening, holding a text message that would ultimately unravel her marriage, I felt both compassion and pride. She had faced a devastating betrayal with courage and dignity. She had rebuilt her life not as a reaction to loss, but as an affirmation of her own worth and potential. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of loneliness, of grief for what had been lost. But those difficult emotions had never again overwhelmed the fundamental rightness of the path I had chosen. I raised my wine glass in a private toast to the setting sun, to the year that had passed, and to whatever adventures still awaited in this unexpected new chapter of my life. To truth, I whispered, and to freedom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.